The key was not lost, it was weaponized. Alara Jones, 42, a woman whose shoulders carried the invisible, generational weight of hardship, stood outside the management office of the Redwood Heights complex. The single, tarnished brass key she sought was not just a piece of metal granting access to her small, third-floor apartment. It was the sole tether securing her and her two young children against the abyss of immediate homelessness. She hadn't lost the key in a simple blunder. It had been deliberately withheld by the management office over a critical oversight, a 3-day delay on her portion of the rent, a minor shortfall caused by a single, unexpected medical bill that had swallowed her contingency fund whole. She had the cash now, crisp bills clutched tightly in her worn purse, but the office had been closed for the weekend, and the complex policy dictated that any late payment resulted in the physical repossession of the primary access key until payment was processed. Alara had spent 2 cold, agonizing nights sleeping in her car in the complex parking lot, watching the illuminated windows of her own apartment. Her children, thankfully, safe at a neighbor's, knowing that her home was right there, inaccessible, guarded by a bureaucracy that saw her not as a person, but as a potential liability. That weight, the slow, corrosive fear of losing everything she had fought to build, had pushed her mind to the absolute brink of despair. She finally stood before the desk of Victor Thorne, the complex manager. Thorne, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his competence, saw his role not as a service provider, but as a minor tyrant over a captive audience of working-class families. He possessed the soft arrogance of someone who had never genuinely struggled, and he loved the moment of transactional dominance. The office itself felt cold, sterile, and aggressively unwelcoming, with pale blue walls and framed motivational posters that mocked the desperation of the tenants waiting outside. Thorne was perched behind a massive mahogany desk, a cruel architectural joke in a building dedicated to low-income housing, his silk tie cinched tight, radiating a smug, self-satisfied power that made Alara's stomach churn. The brass key, her children's shelter, lay directly on a black ledger sheet in the center of his desk, shining under the fluorescent light like a piece of captured treasure. Alara had the money, $850 in total, spread neatly on the countertop. The problem was solved. The debt was cleared. "The total is correct, Ms. Jones," Thorne announced, his voice clipped and dismissive, never quite looking at her. He tapped the keys on his calculator with unnecessary emphasis. "We've processed the payment, and the temporary eviction hold is rescinded. However, there's a procedural breach. 2 nights of temporary key retention incurs a mandatory administrative penalty." He slid a small, white form across the counter. The penalty, a non-negotiable, humiliating $50 fee, precisely the amount she needed for her bus pass and her children's school lunch money for the rest of the week. This was not about store policy or store debt. This was about the manager's hunger for power. The absolute, unassailable, and crippling tyranny of the small man. Alara felt a deep, profound weariness settle in her soul. She had made it through the impossible, only to be crushed by the inevitable small cruelty. She pushed her last few crumpled dollars across the counter, her voice thin with exhaustion. "Mr. Thorne, I gave you everything I had. I'm short $8. Can you please, just this once, waive the remainder? My children need their school money." The air in the office grew suddenly thick. Alara watched as Thorne finally looked up, his eyes cold, devoid of sympathy, fixed not on her eyes, but on the desperate tremor in her hands. The entire exchange was being witnessed by only one other person, Leo Vance, a kind-faced maintenance worker, quietly fixing a broken vending machine in the corner, his presence an irrelevant background detail to Thorne. But Leo was watching and listening, his own deep history with the complex making him acutely aware of Thorne's malice. Alara felt the gaze of the maintenance worker, a man who understood the complex's hidden cruelties, and the shame of her plea deepened, but the children's safety was the only priority. This was the moment where the negotiation ended and the humiliation began. "Waive the fee." Thorne sneered, leaning back, the leather of his executive chair groaning under his weight, a sound that amplified his perceived authority. He picked up Alara's brass key, flipping it lazily between his fingers. "Ms. Jones, you want special dispensation? You want me to ignore policy because of a sob story about school money? This is a business, not a charity. Your entitlement is frankly staggering." He deliberately missed the point. Alara wasn't asking for charity, she was asking for common human decency. "Look at you. You've broken policy, you've caused administrative headaches, and now you want to be rewarded for your failure. I need to be absolutely certain you understand the gravity of being a responsible tenant in my complex." Alara's dignity, the only thing poverty had left her, was now on the chopping block. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, thick with exhaustion and the terror of her circumstance. "Mr. Thorne, I'm begging you. Just give me the key. I promise the $8 will be here on Friday. I work 2 jobs. I don't miss payments. I just need to get back to my home." The office was silent, save for the rhythmic, unsettling clink of Thorne tossing her key from hand to hand. Leo, in the corner, paused his work, his wrench frozen above the vending machine's coin slot, the blood starting to pound in his ears. He instinctively reached for his phone, pulling it out and aiming the camera discreetly toward the manager's desk, not knowing why, only knowing that this moment felt dangerous and absolutely necessary to document. The camera was a silent, neutral witness, capturing the scene without judgment, only cold, hard fact. Then, Thorne delivered the sentence that would shatter the brittle peace of the community and ignite a wave of devastating retribution. His voice was loud, echoing off the high ceiling, savoring the theatrical cruelty. "You want the fee waived, Alara? You want me to believe you're truly sorry for the inconvenience you've caused? There's one way to prove your desperation is real, one way to show me you deserve my compassion." He paused, letting the silence draw out the suspense. "I want you to kneel before the desk. Kneel and beg for the key. Show me that you understand who holds the power here. Do that, and the $8 is waived. You get your key, and you get your home back. Kneel for the key, Alara. That's the policy today." The request was so monstrous, so gratuitously cruel, that Alara froze. The shame was a physical blow, a hot, agonizing rush that threatened to overwhelm her senses. To kneel was to surrender not just her pride, but the inherent human right to stand tall. It was a profound violation of self. Yet, her mind flashed to her children, Maya, 7, who needed her mother's touch to fall asleep, and little Sam, 5, whose fear of the dark was absolute. They were waiting. They were scared. The key was their shelter. The key was their safety. The key was the absolute priority. She looked at the polished floor, then at the small, indifferent smirk on Thorne's face. She looked at the shining brass key, and she knew she had no choice. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the silence in the room now deafening, and began the slow, agonizing descent. "Don't do it," Leo Vance, the maintenance worker, gasped from the corner, his wrench clattering to the floor, breaking the tense silence. His hands were shaking, and his phone was still silently recording the whole, agonizing scene. "Mr. Thorne, you can't make her do that. It's inhumane. It's illegal," he pleaded, his voice cracking with outrage. Leo had seen many of Thorne's cruelties, but this was a new, sickening low. Thorne simply dismissed him with a flick of his hand, utterly unconcerned with the opinion of a salaried employee. "Get back to your work, Vance. This is a private transaction between the management and the tenant. Or do you want to start looking for a new job?" Thorne's eyes, fixed on Alara's humiliation, held a triumphant glare. Leo, fearing for his own livelihood, his income was the only support for his ailing mother, had to retreat, but he did not stop recording. His silent witness was now the only form of immediate justice. Alara's knees hit the unforgiving tile floor with a dull thud. The sudden, profound physical submission caused a wave of nausea to wash over her. She raised her head, her eyes now level with the underside of Thorne's massive desk, a vantage point that only amplified his overwhelming dominance. Her humiliation was complete. She had knelt. She had sacrificed her dignity for her home. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne," she whispered, the words tasting like dust and profound defeat. "Please. I beg you. Give me the key. Let me go home." She extended a shaking hand toward the desk. Thorne grinned, a cruel, triumphant widening of his mouth that spoke volumes of his twisted satisfaction. He had won. He lifted the key from the ledger and, instead of handing it to her, dropped it, not into her waiting hand, but onto the floor, 6 inches beyond her reach. "There you go, Alara. You earned it. Now crawl for it." The shock of the final demand, the insistence on crawling for the key, was another crushing blow. Alara stared at the shining brass key on the dusty floor, then at the cruel satisfaction on Thorne's face. As she began to stretch her arm out, desperate to retrieve the symbol of her survival, a new shadow fell across the threshold of the office. Jade. Jade, a member of the Obsidian Riders Motorcycle Club, was in the complex visiting her elderly aunt. She was a woman known for her stoic demeanor and protective nature, clad in the club's dark leather cut and patches. She had walked into the management office to inquire about a maintenance request and froze in the doorway. She witnessed the entire, agonizing spectacle, the kneeling, the begging, the sheer cruelty of the triumphant manager, and the exhausted, broken woman stretching her arm out toward the dirted floor for her house key. Jade did not need to be told the context. She saw the crime of the soul, the systemic abuse of power playing out in sickening detail. Her face, usually guarded, contorted with a mixture of profound, agonizing disgust and immediate, protective rage. Jade did not speak. She simply pulled out her phone, aimed it at the scene, the kneeling woman, the key on the floor, the sneering manager, and snapped a photo, the light flashed silent and unnoticed in the tense atmosphere. She retreated from the doorway before anyone could register her presence, her mind already running on the high-octane fuel of righteous fury. This was not just a case of simple injustice. This was a declaration of war on the defenseless. She knew instantly that this was a problem that local police couldn't solve and corporate bureaucracy wouldn't touch. This required an army. This required the riders. She retreated to the parking lot, her boots hitting the asphalt with the hard finality of a decision made. She tapped the emergency speed dial on her phone. The contact name simply read, Dante, Code Black. Code Black. Vector, Redwood Heights Complex. Target, imminent systemic violation. I need every set of wheels you can muster, Dante. Now. Jade's voice was low, flat, and hard with controlled violence, a tone Dante, the president of the Obsidian Riders, knew meant the situation was beyond critical. It was a deep, existential threat to their core purpose. The Obsidian Riders were more than a motorcycle club. They were a silent, highly organized force dedicated to intervening when the official justice system failed the vulnerable. They were built on the belief that true power was the defense of the powerless, and their history was forged in protecting marginalized communities from exploitation. Dante, a mountain of a man with a mind as sharp as his polished chrome, watched the photo Jade had sent instantly arrive on his secure tablet. His large hand tightened into a fist around the throttle of his own bike. The image, Alara on her knees, her hand outstretched toward the key on the dirty floor, the smug manager laughing, ignited an immediate, volcanic rage in his chest. He didn't need words. The image spoke volumes of systemic cruelty, of the kind of power that feeds on the starvation of hope. Jade. Dante's voice was a low growl over the phone. We see it. We feel it. Project Obsidian Thunder is a go. Signal the fleet. We are bringing the entire Brotherhood. Tell the woman to hold the line. Justice is inbound. Within 5 minutes, the silent, efficient mobilization began. The message went out through the Riders' encrypted network, not with panic, but with focused, immediate intent. Vulnerability violated. Muster point, Redwood Heights Complex. Code, Justice. Bikers, men and women from every walk of life, dropped what they were doing. Mechanics slammed down wrenches, nurses pulled off scrubs, software engineers unplugged monitors. They pulled on their heavy, dark leather cuts, the Obsidian Riders emblem, a stylized black crow with wings outstretched, now a symbol of impending, inescapable reckoning. The ride itself was a cinematic wave of disciplined fury. 350 motorcycles merged onto the major freeway arteries, moving not like a chaotic gang, but like a unified, silent military convoy. The rhythmic, deep thunder of their combined engines, the low, resonant vibration that precedes a force of nature, was the only sound. They obeyed every traffic law, moved with precision, and maintained absolute silence, their numbers growing exponentially with every mile. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the response was designed to be terrifyingly effective. They were not there to fight. They were there to shut down the entire system. The first 50 bikes arrived at the perimeter of the Redwood Heights complex. Then 100. Then 200. Within 45 minutes of Jade's emergency call, the entire complex entrance was encircled by an impenetrable wall of leather and chrome. The parking lot, usually reserved for mundane sedans and minivans, was transformed into an army encampment. The sound of the final wave of engines cutting out created an instant, profound silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any roar. Dante rode in last, dismounting with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded instant attention. He walked to the front of the complex, the 350 riders parting before him, forming a disciplined, silent formation behind him. He looked at the bland, corporate architecture of the management office, and then at the window where Victor Thorne was visible, his face already dissolving into a sickly, pale mask of fear. Victor Thorne was in the middle of a triumphant, self-congratulatory phone call to his regional supervisor, bragging about his masterful handling of the late-paying tenant situation when the first 50 motorcycles arrived. He had just handed Alara her key, watching her scramble, retrieving it from the floor, the moment of his maximum power, and then dismissed her with a final, cutting remark. Now, he was watching the parking lot fill up with a silent, terrifying army of leather-clad men and women, their faces hidden by dark visors and their postures radiating controlled, intense fury. "Sir," Thorne stammered into the phone, his voice losing its polished composure.
"There's a protest."
A large, well-organized group of bikers. "They're blocking the entire main entrance. I can't see the exit. The complex is surrounded." The sudden, overwhelming realization that his petty cruelty had summoned this monstrous, organized force made his stomach drop. He hung up, his hands shaking, and rushed to the window, staring out at the impenetrable wall of bikes. They were too many. They were too disciplined. They were too silent. Dante stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the light in the office doorway. He looked directly at Thorne, who was retreating behind his absurd mahogany desk. The tension in the office, and the entire complex, was now suffocating, a silent, psychological vice tightening around the manager. 350 riders stood perfectly still, blocking every vehicular and pedestrian exit, ensuring no tenant, no customer, and especially no manager could leave the premises. They had not touched a single thing. They had not shouted a single threat. They had merely stood and waited. "Victor Thorne." Dante's voice finally broke the silence. It was a low, resonant tone that carried immense, chilling authority. "You are currently operating in violation of human decency and basic tenant rights. Your complex is now officially closed." Thorne, attempting to summon his lost authority, puffing out his chest, pointed a shaky finger at the silent army. "You can't do this. This is private property. This is trespassing. I'm calling the police." He snatched up his phone and pressed the speed dial. Nothing happened. The phone was dead. Total silence. Dante revealed with a cold, devastating clarity. "You won't be calling anyone, Thorne. Our security detail has temporarily localized all outgoing signals. And that's the least of your problems. You see, the key you just dropped on the floor for Alara to crawl for? It's not just an access key. It's also the physical override to the complex's centralized utility system. It's the backup master key that cuts all heat, power, and water to the complex in an emergency. You just handed over the control system for every tenant's survival to a woman you humiliated." Thorne's face went white with the realization. The stakes had just exponentially increased from a petty workplace dispute to a massive, systemic failure that would affect hundreds of families. The key was a genuine, high-value asset, and he had treated its owner like garbage. This was not just about Alara, it was about the control over the entire complex's existence. "What do you want?" Thorne whimpered, his false bravery dissolving into panic. "We want an apology," Dante stated, his eyes boring into the manager's soul. "A public, recorded apology. And we want to ensure that this complex, and every complex you manage, understands the true cost of using power to humiliate the vulnerable." Dante motioned to Jade. Jade played the video she had recorded, the moment of the kneeling, the moment of the key dropping, the sound of Thorne's callous laughter, on a large tablet, holding it up so the other bikers could see. The sheer wave of collective disgust that rolled off the 350 riders was a palpable, terrifying force. The reckoning was here, and it was absolute. The silent pressure became unbearable. Thorne knew his career, his comfort, and his life were over. The bikers weren't leaving. The phone lines were jammed. The complex was completely shut down. The video was already circulating among the tenants, who were pouring out of their apartments to witness the spectacle from the balconies. The anger was building, and Thorne was completely isolated. "Fine," Thorne spat, the word laced with venom and defeat. "I'll apologize. I'll make a statement to the tenant. Now call off your animals." "They are not animals, Thorne," Dante corrected, his voice a dangerous whisper. "They are justice in leather. And you will apologize not just to the tenant, but to the woman who stood up for her. Where is Alara Jones?" Alara, having retreated to a quiet spot in the parking lot, was gently helped to the front by Leo, the maintenance worker, who supported her trembling arm. She stood before the crowd of 350 silent, protective bikers, the brass key clutched in her hand. Thorne was brought out and stood before her. The difference in their posture, Thorne's slumped, defeated, Alara's upright, dignified, a profound statement on where the true power lay. "I apologize," Thorne mumbled, looking at his shoes. "I apologize for the misunderstanding."
"Not good enough," Dante growled. "Tell her what you did, Thorne.
"Tell her why you enjoyed it." Thorne's jaw worked, clenching with desperate, fading pride. "I made you kneel," he forced out, the words ragged. "I made you kneel for your key to waive a small fee, and I dropped it on the floor. I was wrong."
"Why?"
Alara asked, her voice soft but resonating with the weight of her suffering. "I paid the rent. I worked 2 jobs. Why did you force me to surrender my last piece of dignity?" Thorne finally broke. The silent fury of the crowd, the chilling knowledge that his humiliation was being broadcast by dozens of phones, overwhelmed him. Because I felt powerless in my own job. I hate this place. You all look at me like I'm a servant. I needed to feel like I had control over something. You were easy to control." He was sobbing now, his mask of arrogance shattered, revealing the pathetic, fragile man underneath. Every camera recorded the confession. The truth, he had done it because he could, because Alara was the weakest link, the easiest target for his misplaced rage. Dante stepped forward, turning to face the cameras and the hundreds of complex tenants watching from above. This man did not just abuse one woman. He abused his power. This complex hired him. This management group trusted him to treat human beings with respect. Until Victor Thorne is fired and this management issues a public debt-free resolution for Alara Jones, 350 riders will stand here. No one in. No business done. The complex is shut down. The siege was absolute. For 3 hours, the complex was a fortress of silent, unmoving chrome and leather. No repair vehicles, no mail carriers, no customers, no movement. The pressure on the corporate management was immediate and immense. The regional director arrived within 90 minutes. Victor Thorne was terminated on the spot, his immediate dismissal filmed and announced to the crowd, the roar of the bikers' synchronized engine revs, a single, overwhelming sound of collective satisfaction. The only applause. The director, sweating profusely, approached Alara. "Ms. Jones, we are deeply, profoundly sorry. Mr. Thorne is gone. We will cover all your fees, of course." "No," Alara said, her voice now steady, imbued with the strength of 350 riders standing behind her. "That's not enough. There was one man, Leo Vance, the maintenance worker, who tried to help me. He risked his job to object. He recorded the truth. I want him promoted to the new complex manager. He has the character that Mr. Thorne lacked." The director hesitated. "A maintenance worker? That's highly irregular." "Age doesn't determine character, sir," Dante interjected, his voice firm. "Compassion does. And Leo Vance has the respect of the entire community. He is the manager this complex needs." Within the hour, Leo Vance, the maintenance worker who believed in quiet justice, was promoted to the highest position in the complex. His first act as the new manager was to call Alara back into the office, now a transformed space of accountability and respect. He handed her not the old, tarnished brass key she had knelt for, but a brand new, silver key to a completely renovated, debt-free unit in the complex, a gift from the Obsidian Riders Collective Fund and a systemic correction from the corporate office. She was also offered the position of tenant liaison, a job dedicated to ensuring no resident ever felt the shame she endured. Alara's dignity was restored, and her future was secure. Leo Vance became an honorary member of the Obsidian Riders. On her first day moving into her new, beautiful apartment, 350 bikers formed a slow, silent escort, their engines a low, protective rumble, surrounding the moving truck. People lined the complex sidewalks, not in fear, but in profound respect, saluting Alara, not for kneeling, but for standing up and refusing to be broken. Alara Jones is now the tenant liaison, stronger and more resilient than ever, because she found something Victor Thorne will never possess, a brotherhood willing to shut down the world for her. Sometimes, justice does not come through courtrooms or corporate policy. Sometimes, it arrives on 350 Harleys, driven by the unstoppable, collective belief that the most powerful thing you can do is stand as a silent, unmoving army between cruelty and its victim.